Welcome to our last segment of Civil Discourse Now. My name is Mark Small. I'm an Indianapolis attorney. My co-host is Paul Ogden, also a member of the Indiana Bar. We are shooting this on December 17th, 2011. It's a chilly day outside and kind of gray, but we've been having a good conversation here at Big Hat Books, 6510 Cornell Avenue in Broad Ripple. Our guests are Karen Kay Leonard, President of the League of Women's Voters of Indiana, and Anthony Simons, GOP Ward Chairman and Committee Precinct Committee Person in District 2 here in Marion County, and also former City County Council candidate. We've been talking about various issues related to voting, voter ID, and one topic we were wanting to discuss was early voting.
Well, I think actually Anthony was going to ask about voting centers.
Yeah, on the voting centers, I know we had kind of brushed briefly on how it would save a lot of taxpayer money on that. I been doing some research on voting centers, and I was amazed at how the figures that came in when they did the test counties for Tippecanoe, Wayne, and Cass, and how much they have been able to save money on the voting centers. And I actually found last night there was a study at the Indiana Fiscal Policy Institute. They said that if we had voting centers on election day, it would save every single county statewide. It would save money, taxpayer money. And I tell you what, as a fiscal conservative, I am delighted in seeing figures like that.
Well, in the vote center, for example, since we use a paper ballot in Indianapolis, one of the things that happens is that your ballot is printed when you appear to vote. They don't send 800 ballots to a precinct where perhaps 200 people will come to vote.
Which is what they're doing
now. And then
now.
you'll send all the paper ballots back, and many times it's even worse than that, because there are certain kinds of splits where you have to have a print of A and a print of B, and depending on where you live within the precinct, you get one or the other of those ballots. So
you say
it saves all of that.
So,
print and paper.
So the way that having voting centers
Vote centers, no E.
Vote centers would be.
I think it sounds better voting, but I think vote centers is technically correct.
Yeah.
So
grammatically.
Instead of going to your precinct, there would be here in Marion County, 40 different places,
or
20, something like that.
Maybe more.
And so you don't go to your own precinct. You go downtown to work. You could go into the vote center and vote there, and it would just make it much more accessible for the voters. There'd be much less paperwork. It'd save more money. It makes a lot of sense.
It's convenient, and it saves money. I mean, that's...
And it takes fewer workers. You know, when you have 600 precincts to cover with 5 workers apiece, you have many more people to pay, and many more sites to find, and many more pieces of equipment to take out and drop off.
But both parties have been. I talked to the Democratic chairman. Who was the chairman? It was what do they call it? Executive director. They're against. Democrats are against voting centers. Republicans are against voting centers. I think part of the problem is they like being able to push the candidate on election day. That gauntlet you have to go through in order to get in to vote.
That alienates everybody.
That a lot of voters do not like.
I don't know of
So you think
anyone.
the outside part is the real reason that they
I
want
think
to
so.
maintain?
And plus, it's a big change. They don't know how it will come, whether it will help them or hurt them.
Obviously, at first, these things are difficult. They're very complicated to set up, and they're expensive in the first place, but not ultimately expensive. And so they do create an upheaval in the system that a lot of people aren't willing to undergo.
There's another aspect to it too, and Paul and I were discussing this the other evening. There's a cadre of people in the 2 major parties at a local level that work those polls, that are doing a lot of the nuts and bolts stuff, not running for election, but they work those polls. They make money off those polls. They might not make very much money during the year, but that $75 or whatever, I got paid $75 as sheriff or judge one year working the polls. To me, it wasn't that much money. I mean, it was still, I value $1, but a lot of these folks, they count on that money, and I think that's, and they're kind of like the sergeants of the political parties. They don't want to give up that money coming in like that.
Well, there'd still be other jobs available. I mean,
other positions.
the voting centers, they got to staff those.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, but the people...
You wouldn't need as many people.
But going back to the thing about the people outside the chute, because the chute in Indiana law, that you cannot have anyone within 50 feet of the chute. And the chute, actually, if you look at the statute, is the door of the polling place. And any place you go, virtually, people are inside. Because if you think about the time of the year that people are voting, here in Indiana, we vote in primaries in May, is it? Yeah. Okay, you're lucky to have a nice day in early May. I mean, because a lot of times it's going to be rainy and wet. November, for the general elections, it's cold and it's
Dark.
wet and it's dark. And so people, the workers don't want to be outside, but also people going in don't want to talk to those people when they're going in. I mean, I've already made my decision about the person for whom I'm going to vote.
Well, I know as a candidate, when I was running for city county council, I had the benefit of going to a couple of different polling locations. And when people are coming in and out, you know, there are some people who actually will sit down and maybe actually listen to what you have to say, listen to the candidate. There was one story, a couple of my friends were talking with this one lady that came in, and she actually took out, I mean, it was kind of like in a lobby area at the, over at the, right around St. Vincent's in that Martin House Hotel. And it was a voter that came in, took a chair and just sat down and basically talked about 15, 20 minutes. And they were just talking about me as the candidate. Mm-hmm. And so I think there actually are maybe a number of voters who may not have made their decision when they go into the polling locations.
Well, I think of the candidate, being the candidate is a little bit different than just a routine.
Somebody who's handing out flyers.
And I'm not against free speech. I'm just saying that
sometimes you are.
Well, sometimes speech can be annoying. Although I had never thought about it until now. I think I might, at a future election, just walk up to the little table where and reach in my pocket and toss a coin and look at it and then fill in. I think that might be just kind of an expression.
Yeah. Let's talk about early voting, Mark.
Okay.
That was a big controversy this time. We have in Marion County, which I'm most familiar with, I'm not as familiar with what goes on in other counties. We had one location at the City County building. In previous elections, we've had two, one on the north side of town, one on the south side of town. And this election, the Republicans, you have to have a unanimous vote on the election board, and the Republican member voted against those two satellite locations. Wow. Personally, I didn't see a problem with it. I thought, hey, just let Democrats pick one, let the Republicans pick one. Let's not make a big issue of it.
I don't think the issue was where they were. It seemed to me that the issue was, or at least what I read and kind of heard, was just, oh, this may lead to fraud. Mm-hmm. Sort of like what you all were saying earlier about we may have had fraud in such and such an election and so and so has been accused.
I think the cost was raised.
Well, yeah, but the cost, of course, would have been underwritten after the clerk got a company to say they'd underwrite, or not a company, the union. Yeah, UAW. But that wasn't a good idea either necessarily, but the cost had been planned for. And so I think it was a paper tiger.
Yeah. I think in terms of the cost, I think if you look at the cost per vote, it was going to be like $8 per vote, and Republicans' position was prohibitive. Now you may say there were other political calculations in there. Typically, having taught political science, Republicans tend to want to make voting a little more difficult. Democrats tend to want to make voting easier.
We have a concession there.
Well, one thing that did
I didn't
work
say
well in
difficult in a bad way.
In Indianapolis, one of the accommodations that was made when we decided only to have early voting downtown was that the clerk arranged with the parking lot across the street from the courthouse to let people park free. You had to pay when you got there, as you always have to do, but if you brought your ticket from the polling place, then you could get your money back. And that worked. I tried it out deliberately to find out if it really would happen, and it did.
Does the city have to pay that operator, or is the operator the city?
I can't tell you. I think Denison is. Oh. I think the person who has the company that has that
Denison's not interested in money.
So somebody had to make a financial arrangement, I assume.
Right.
But
Denison has made a lot of financial arrangements in the city.
It's hard to park downtown, and for many people that's a deterrent. So if you make it a little bit easier, you can't necessarily take an Indigo bus down to vote and go home. And so if you make another accommodation, that's at least a little something. But I agree with you that to have sites outside the city center where people can park easily and vote easily would be a great advantage.
Well, we got Anthony here. He'll defend the Republican position.
Well, I was looking at this a little bit more last night, and I was looking at the cost. I mean, I guess both sides kind of agreed about $53,000 or so that it would cost to have these satellite voting locations. And they're saying, well, it's already in the budget, so why not do it? It's like, well, just because it's in the budget doesn't mean we have to spend it. Now, for me, I'm a very strong fiscal conservative, and when I ran for city county council, I ran on looking at the budget and looking at taking with a fine-tooth comb and making sure, do we really need to spend this money? And I think it's one thing where I think if we look at the cost-benefit analysis, and that's a big thing that I would have used if I was on the council, is everything that would come through, I would look at it through a lens of the cost-benefit analysis. And there was actually a study that was done. I think there was a position paper in the Indianapolis Business Journal, and there's been research from the MIT, American University, and the American Enterprise Institute. And those studies show that those cities that offered the satellite voting locations, it actually decreased voter turnout. And in Marion County, now they say there was when we had the satellite voting locations, I think it was in 2008,
yes.
It did go up 1%. Overall, there was a 60% increase in registers, and ballots cast from 2004 to 2008 increased by 18%. So it's very minuscule, when we talk about the voters that come into the satellite voting locations and the cost that we're willing to pay for that. And so for me as a fiscal conservative, I would not want to have satellite voting locations because of that. If we can show that we don't have to really spend any money to do that. Now, I know the UAW was going to be able to, want to do that, but I think that's, it's a very partisan special interest group. I think that opens up a whole can of worms with that. But I think that, and also I've been hearing there was some security questions as well. But I think for the most part, for me, it's more the cost. And it's just, there's really no evidence that it increases turnout at all.
Well, it sure makes it more convenient, though. And if we're going to talk about doing things that are convenient for citizens, I think convenience in voting is an important consideration, more so than convenience for, say, parking for the Super Bowl, or convenience for something that's kind of frivolous like that. And just because I haven't read those studies, just because the studies show that there's some type of correlation does not mean that there's a causation there, because there can be other causative factors. And I know that when we voted at the location here on the north side, we voted early in 2008. There was a tremendous line there, but it also meant that we could get the voting out of the way, and that was just kind of a nifty thing to do. It was a lot easier.
Did you have a good time? I know a lot of people who treated it like they treat waiting in line at the precinct. They visited with their neighbors and enjoyed it.
There was a reason, and I vote in the Democratic primary, but I'm not necessarily a Democrat. But there was a reason for being celebratory that day, because eight years of darkness were coming to an end. But that will be a topic that we'll discuss here in a few weeks about crossover voting in primaries, because I think that's going to be an interesting topic to come up. We've had a fun time today. This has been a good show. Our guests have been Karen Kay Leonard, President of the League of Women's Voters of Indiana, and Anthony Simons, GOP Ward Chairman and Precinct Committee Person for District 2 here in Marion County. Paul Ogden, my co-host. I'm Mark Small. This is Civil Discourse Now. No shouting, no name calling, civil discourse, reasoned discourse, even though you're wrong, Paul. So,
I'm usually wrong.
Thank you very much. Hope that you join us next week. Has been our guest.
Thank you.
We've talked about economics and education and just